Welcome to our community. Susie Thomas with you this morning. So excited to welcome Elizabeth Bennett. She is the author of several devotionals that use the Enneagram and the personalities that go with each number. So we've got the Helper growing as an Enneagram 2, the Individualist growing as an Enneagram 4, and the newest, the Peacemaker, growing as an Enneagram 9. Elizabeth, good morning.
Good morning.
So I'm curious as to, first of all, let's start at the beginning. This might be a brand new word for someone listening. So what is the Enneagram? What are these numbers?
Yes. So the Enneagram is a personality typology. It's actually really, really old, and we don't exactly know when it started, where it came from, but it kind of came to life in the way that it is right now in the 1950s. It was adopted by a lot of different monasteries, and the Catholic world actually uses this typology quite a bit. And then in about 5 years ago, the book The Road Back to You came out by Ian Morgan Cron and Suzanne Stabile. And that book really was one of the first books to ever put the Enneagram into layman's terms in a way that made it really accessible to everyone. And so that was actually my first introduction to the Enneagram was through that book, The Road Back to You. And now that everyone is starting to learn about it so much more, it's become so much more prevalent on social media and stuff like that. And people have been able to access the Enneagram and figure out what their type is, which has been really cool. But the Enneagram personality typology categorizes personality into 9 different types, which I know to some people will be like, there can't only be 9 different types, right? 9 different personalities.
Right.
But when we actually look at it, how the Enneagram explains it is it's not like a static type. Like you are not the exact same personality as someone else who's that same type as you. It's more of a color spectrum. So like a Enneagram type 1, say that they're blue. Like you could be a very teal blue, and then you could have someone that's almost a black blue, and you'll look pretty different, but at the core, you're both still blue.
It's so interesting. But I have so many different ways I want to go with you right now. What do you recommend? Because you say there's so many little tests on social media that we're able to click on, quickly find your Enneagram number. Do you recommend that, or is this a little more deep than something like that?
So as an Enneagram teacher, my leaning is definitely that it's a little bit more deep than that. But if I know that people, it's such a complicated system in some ways. So if you are just really wanting to figure out what your type is, I would say you can take a test that you find or a quiz. Just hold the results loosely.
Yes.
So they might tell you that you are an Enneagram 4 or an Enneagram 6, and you might not even know what that means. Or it might tell you that you might be one of 3 numbers. Well, just use that as a jumping off point to do your own research. There's so many great Enneagram websites and pages, like the EnneagramInstitute.com gives very thorough outlines of what each type looks like. So if it says you're a 6, and you go onto the Enneagram Institute and look up 6s, you can be like, oh, yes, that's totally me. Or you can be like, no, I need to keep looking. As well, on my Instagram page, which is how I kind of got started teaching the Enneagram, it's called Enneagram.life, if you wanted to look that up on Instagram.
Nice.
The link in our bio goes to a free assessment, and that one is actually a printout assessment. It's about 6 pages long, and it takes you through you just circle the bubbles that you, the phrases you relate to the most, and it kind of takes you on a step-by-step journey to what your type is most likely to be, and then we give you resources for further research.
That's awesome. And we can find that on Instagram at enneagram.life.
Yep.
Okay, and take that for free and get us started. And then you're going to say, wow, I need a devotional that's just for me, and Elizabeth's got them. That's what's so good. We also have wings. Before we get into the devotionals, explain the wings, because you're talking to a 7 with maybe a wing of another healthy dose of 7. So I just, when I read that, it was convicting? Because when you read your personality type and you know it's the one, you'll know when you have found the one, because it will be, oh yeah, I do that, and I like that I do that. Oh, and I like that I do that. And then it starts to get a little more painful, like, oh, I hate when I do that. Oh, yes, that is exactly yes. And it can be very convicting at the same time. And that is one part about the Enneagram, is it not? That it's the good and the bad that's all rolled into one of that personality style.
Oh, definitely. A huge theory of the Enneagram is that your best points are also your worst points.
Mm-hmm.
So for me as an Enneagram 4, I'm highly creative. That's obviously a really great thing. But in that creativity, I can also look at other people's creativity and think that my creativity is not enough. Mm-hmm. And then it's paralyzing to me to actually put my creativity into the world. So like that thing that's really good about me is also in some ways a hindrance.
Yes, there's two sides to each coin.
Sure. So when you read about your personality type and it starts getting into that kind of yucky stuff, I think really the word that I always use to just kind of describe that feeling is like, I didn't know other people knew this about me.
Right. And they know way more than we probably know of ourselves anyway. But the wings, being a 4, then I'm guessing you either have a wing of 3 or a wing of 5. Does the wing have to be one of the numbers that's side by side your number, or can you be a 4 with a wing of 2?
Yeah, so all Enneagram teachers agree that your wing has to be one of the numbers on either side of your core number.
Okay.
That's just the way that we have seen it work out in both psychology and in just practice. And so I am a type 4, and having a wing of a different number, people often explain it as your core type is like the mashed potatoes, and your wing is like the pepper or salt.
Mm.
And so say that wing 3 is salt and wing 5 is pepper. So I'm a person, I use a lot of pepper, and I use barely any salt. Mm-hmm. But there are people that use both. There are people that use none at all. And so that's one way that someone can be the same type but yet look really differently, because they might really lean on one wing rather than the other. And one way that I think is really interesting that wings play out is if you just met me on the street, you might assume I'm a type 5. I'm pretty quiet. That's kind of how type 5s are known as. I love to observe. Mm-hmm. And if you get me talking about a topic I'm really into, I can go on for days. And that's kind of also a trademark of type 5. Mm-hmm. But if you think of wings as something that's covering, when I'm not comfortable, that wing comes out and it covers me, because all of those behaviors don't lead back to my core vulnerabilities and my core personality and my that core of myself. They're all more superficial behaviors. So I actually use that wing a lot.
You've explained that better than I've ever heard it explained. Can some of these behaviors be forced upon us because we have to play different roles? Let's say we are not comfortable necessarily in a role, but we have to learn how to be a different number in, say, the workplace or a different situation.
Oh, of course. If different things are expected of you, or you get the feeling that your core personality might not be completely welcomed in an environment, we have those tools to work from. We have a couple of different behaviors and wings we can use. So a good example of that is kind of in the situations where I would use my 3 wing. So a 3 is the success-oriented, really driven, that kind of thing. So if I like work as a public speaker occasionally, and so if I get into those fields, that 3 wing, a couple of those behaviors that I can pull out tend to be pulled out because I need them.
Mm-hmm. Is this a Christian thing?
So not in and of itself. Like there's some different theories about like where the Enneagram came from in and of itself. And I would have to tell you that almost everything that people would say about where the Enneagram comes from is a myth, because we don't really know. Even if you look at the Wikipedia page, they'll say, we don't really know where the Enneagram came from. And so in and of itself, no, I doubt that it was created as a Christian tool. Just because, I mean, I would love to tell you that Elizabeth Elliot created the Enneagram.
Right.
She did not. And that's not where it came from. But however, when it was really redefined in the 50s, it was redefined by a guy named Oscar Achezo, and he was raised Catholic. So he put a lot of Catholic verbiage into how we understand the Enneagram. So each Enneagram type correlates to a deadly sin. It doesn't mean that you only use that sin. It just means that that sin can be a pain point for you
Yeah.
in particular.
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, there's only 7 deadly sins, so they added 2.
So they had to come up with 2 more.
Yeah, he had to come up with 2 more, which I believe those 2 are deceit and fear. Those are the 2 that he came up with. And so there is that language, and then there's also the language of like going to health and like getting closer to God, and then walking away from God and getting more unhealthy. And all of that verbiage is mostly just because the man who kind of designed it more had Catholic roots.
Yes. So when he's talking about deadly sins, he's kind of talking about a darker side of this, that especially if they came up with 2 additional ones. How is this personality style different than, say, love languages?
Yeah. So your love language is going to talk about say one facet of you, one of the biggest ways that you receive love. But how the Enneagram is different really than both that and like Myers-Briggs or the DISC assessment or Strength Finders is because the Enneagram really gives you a really fluid look at your personality. Whereas say if your love language is gifts, then it's kind of static at like, oh, you receive love by getting gifts. Like that's it. But the Enneagram talks about like what your main personality is, what that main personality is motivated by. And you can be motivated by one thing and have certain behaviors because of that motivation. Well, someone else can have those exact same behaviors, but a different motivation. So that motivation is really key. That's what makes your Enneagram type your Enneagram type. But the Enneagram also explains why do we act so different when we are in stress or when we are comfortable. Like, why am I a different person if I was deployed in Afghanistan versus if I was sitting on my couch eating chips?
Yes.
And it explains that by the arrows. So if you look at a symbol of the Enneagram, you'll see that each type is connected to 2 different types. And that is explained by when you are in stress. So a season of stress, something's going on, usually transition prompts stress. Then you will pick up some negative behaviors of that other type that's connected to you through that stress arrow. And then when you are growing and doing well and secure, that other arrow is where you get the better attributes of that type when you are in that area.
There's a healthy you number and an unhealthy you number. And you want to go with the healthy one of when you're your best self.
Yeah, so there's a couple different forms of that because you can be unhealthy in your number and be growing and be going to that growth number. But you can also be a healthy number and be experiencing a season of stress.
Yes.
And experience attributes of that other number. So health and growth versus stress and security are a little bit different verbiage with the Enneagram.
I found myself being very resistant when I was first recommended to read about these because my first thought was, I am who God says I am. And I want to fill my spirit with all those scriptures that tell me who God says I am. And here I have this number 7 telling me that I do this and this and this, and it nails it, honestly. All the good and all the bad. How is that different? Because we all are absolutely who God says we are. How do we combine these 2?
Yeah, so we are absolutely 100% everything that God says we are. We are loved, we are saved, we are reconciled to Him. All of those things are true of every Enneagram type that's a believer. But I think we can all look around the world and we see that God created several different types of people. And it's hard for us to understand each other often because we all are operating from very different viewpoints of just the world in general. And so when we go to the Enneagram, there's a couple of different things that I have found to be really helpful about the Enneagram in my walk with Christ. And one of them is that it really confirmed the ways that I was made to reflect God. So as an Enneagram 4, my creativity is a reflection of God. My emotions are a reflection of an emotional, creative God. And I am well equipped to show that part of the world, of God to the world, because He gave me those certain attributes. God is so big and so good that He could not give us all of His attributes.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so they are spread out. And that's why we need the body. We need all of us. And so that's really encouraging when I go to the Enneagram to see that, to have that really confirmed in me of like, oh, yes, this is how I reflect God to the world, as well as like saying that those good parts of me can also be bad parts of me. Like my deadly sin as an Enneagram 4 is envy.
Because
And
we're human.
I don't think I would have ever told you before I learned about the Enneagram that I struggled with envy. I think I always thought it was self-pity, maybe being judgmental, things like that. But having it called out in me as a sin has really changed my perspective and has really opened my eyes to a proclivity about myself that I wasn't aware of. So those two things, both being encouraged in how I reflect God and having sin be so exposed in me, both of those things have actually really helped my walk with Christ.
We're speaking with Elizabeth Bennett, talking about, well, we will be talking about the peacemaker, growing as an Enneagram 9. We'll be back after these words. You're listening to Our Community. Welcome back to Our Community. Susie Thomas visiting with Elizabeth Bennett. She is the author of a series of devotionals, each based on one number of the Enneagram. And first, you're going to want to find out who you are in your Enneagram. And then once you know that, pick out your book, right? Do you have the 3 so far, Elizabeth? Are you working on more? Are you going to end up with all 9 at some point?
Yes, we will end up with all 9. So on September 8th is when books 2, 4, and 9 are releasing to the world. So all of those are already done, getting printed as we speak. We're getting ready to be released into the world. And then right now I'm working on books 1, 6, and 7 that are releasing next March. So March 2021. And then after that, I'll be working on books 3, 5, 8, which will be releasing the following September, so September 2021.
How did you decide which ones to tackle first?
Oh, so that's always a really tricky question. Obviously, when I came up with this idea and like I approached it, I really wanted to release all 9 at the same time. Like that
Sure.
has always been my plan. But obviously, I am not a book publisher, and I don't know exactly how all that works. And they have told me that's very difficult. So we are launching them 3 at a time. So how I went about choosing the first 3 that I was going to write about is I actually looked at our Instagram, and they have some helpful analytics, which basically tells you which posts are liked the most, which ones are commented on the most, how much engagement do we get on each post. And I can pretty clearly see through there that we have a really big amount of 2s, 4s, and 9s that are engaging on our page. And so if we were going to create devotionals and get them out, I wanted to get the most out to the biggest part of our audience as I could first.
And there are
So
triads.
those ones wouldn't be waiting.
Yes, it's brilliant. But there are triads, are there not, that all kind of have the same motivators and same downside? Yes? Do I understand that correctly? Okay.
Yeah, so there are 3 different triads. There's actually several different groups of 3s with the Enneagrams, but the main theory you're talking about probably is the heart, head, and gut.
Yes,
triad.
that's it. Yes.
Yes. So like types 8s, 1s, and 9s are all considered to be in the gut triad. So that means that they receive all information first through their gut. And your gut is that really core center of your being that takes in information and says, this is right or this is wrong right away. And each of those types then moves on to something else. So then 8s will move on to action. 9s will move on to thinking, or move on to feeling, rather. And then 1s will move on to thinking. So they have that initial gut feeling, and then they move on to the others. Whereas 2s, 3s, and 4s are in the heart triad. So they receive all information through feeling. How does this make me feel? That's how they receive information. And then each of them moves on to something else. So 2s move on to action. How do I feel? What am I going to do? 3s do not like what they're feeling, usually chuck it at the wall and move straight on to logic. Whereas 4s receive information as feeling, and then they ask themselves, how do I feel about what I'm feeling? Because they are the big feelers of the Enneagram.
Yes.
And then 6, 7s, or 5, 6s, and 7s are part of the thinking triad. So they receive all information as, what do I think? This is something that needs to be analyzed.
And then obsess about it. We will obsess. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
They will obsess. And these are the types that tend to struggle a little bit more with anxiety because of that thinking paralysis. And fives then want to do something about it, usually in the form of like research. Sixes will think about it even more, and they are the ones that tend to struggle with anxiety the most. And sevens move on to feeling.
Yes, that's right. Nailed it. This tells me that there's a golden rule. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. That's not necessarily true, is it? We need to do unto others as they want to be done unto.
Well, I do feel like in some regards, I mean, obviously everyone wants to be loved and treated kindly. So that's a good thing, to treat everyone with respect in that way. But I think rather it's, don't assume that everyone thinks how you do and operates in the world how you do. You have to kind of assume first that they probably don't, that they are receiving information through a different center than how you receive it. And I just think that we all just need to be really curious about our fellow humans.
As we get to know each other better, we know in what ways that can be best expressed. I'll tell a story on myself. My husband was having a big occasion, and I was throwing a huge surprise party for him. And because I would love to have a surprise party thrown for me. And I took him out for dinner while 100 people filed into our house and hid. And he said at dinner, "Thank you so much for not making a big deal about this."
Oh.
And then we went home to this huge party that he hated every minute of. But he understood that I did that out of love, and I understood never do that again, because that would not be the way he wants that expressed. So this is what's so good about this. We really can get to know even our children that we feel we know so well. Once you study this, you kind of think, oh, you know what? I would have guessed we were the same number. We are not. We're very different, and I can express things, my caring and my love for them, differently in the way that their receptors will be most receiving of them. Well, let's get to your books. Let's talk about the most recent one, The Peacemaker, Growing as an Enneagram 9. So when Jesus was saying, "Blessed are the peacemakers," he was basically saying, "Blessed are you nines," yes?
Yes, definitely. So nines, the peacemakers, their motivation is internal stability and peace, which makes them pretty conflict avoidant in a lot of ways, because obviously the opposite of internal peace is conflict. But really, they want everyone to be getting along. They want to preserve the peace. They would rather it be your way than their way if it's going to cause a conflict. But really, I've heard a lot of people say that the Enneagram 9s are the sweethearts of the Enneagram. They sit right on top of that circle, and it's said that they can see the viewpoint of every other type, which can also make it hard for them to type themselves, because they're like, oh, I can see that. Like, oh, I see why someone would do that, or I see why someone would think this way.
Sure.
And so, yeah, really, really sweet people for the most part, especially the healthier nines. And my sister-in-law and my mother-in-law are both Enneagram 9s, and I have learned so much from them. And they have both been such calming and such generous and gracious presence in my life.
I've also read if you anger one, you won't soon forget it.
Yes, the animal that is often correlated with Enneagram types 9s are the elephant. And it's because they are the slowest, most docile animal, unless they are charging at you and they could kill you. But really, that only usually happens for 9s. The 9s that I coach or talk to, usually they have had extremely angry outbursts maybe twice in their life.
Okay.
If maybe 5 times, and that's one of the reasons why it is so memorable.
And do they get over it? Is it possible to reconcile with a 9 after you've angered a 9?
Oh, definitely, because they like I said, they want
to see your point,
and they want to see your point. And if you are repentive, and if you are willing to understand them and not just push them aside, because that's usually what angers 9s is. They feel overlooked. They feel like you don't care what their opinion is. And that usually builds up a lot of pent anger. And so if you come to them wanting to understand them as well, usually they are very forgiving.
What would be the difference then for a 9 of being a peacemaker versus being a peacekeeper?
Yes. So a peacekeeper is someone who's trying to keep the peace at all costs. Usually that cost is themselves and their wants, needs, and desires. So this is the person that won't choose what restaurant they want to go to because they want you to be happy. That is trying to keep the peace. But a peacemaker, on the other hand, is someone who knows that conflict often brings about peace. That like Jesus was a peacemaker, like bringing people together in the end, calling out sin. All of these things will lead to a greater peace. And so that's what you want to strive for. You want to strive to be a peacemaker, not necessarily a peacekeeper.
Mm-hmm. Well, what can a 9 look forward to in this devotional? It's 60 days of growing. How do you take the 9 from point A to point B?
Yes, so we go over several different topics in this book. I come in slow with talking about their gifting. So we talk about peacemaking and how that's a strength of theirs and how that's how they reflect God to the rest of us. And then we go into like talking about their deadly sin, and we talk about sloth, which is their deadly sin, and how they use sloth to numb to pain, especially in their life. So if there's conflict going on, you might find a 9 very deep involved in a book, or they might go exercising, or they might just want to go take a nap. Like they're trying to numb to those negative feelings that they're experiencing. So we talk quite a bit about that and how that looks like giving your sloth to God and letting God be your peace. And then we talk about the strength of the gut feelings, and how 9s need to listen to those very initial gut feelings, and how the Holy Spirit can train your gut, and so that you are agreeing with what God says is right and wrong. And then we talk about merging, which is something that 9s do as a conflict coping mechanism. And this is basically where if they're talking to you and you say that you love horses, they're like, oh my gosh, I love horses too. What kind of horse do you like? But then they leave that conversation and they're like, oh, actually, I'm terrified of horses. I had a horse bite me when I was a little kid. Like, I don't like horses. But they're trying to appease you. And for that moment, they can merge with how excited you are about that topic, whether they are actually excited about it or not.
So there's a chameleon quality to a 9. They can...
Yes.
Okay.
Other numbers would do this in a way that is like people-pleasing, where they're just like, oh, I don't want to start a conflict. I'm not going to mention what my opinion really is. But what's so odd about 9s is that in those moments, sometimes they can actually forget what their own opinion is. They are so invested and focused on you that they can actually forget. And that is completely odd and unknown to the other 8 of us.
Well, yeah. So interesting. Oh, I knew we were going to run out of time. Okay, Elizabeth, first of all, will you come back? Because I know you've got several more sets of these coming out, right?
Yes.
Awesome. Okay. You've also got the individualist and the helper being Enneagram 2. The individualist, that's you, Elizabeth, very creative, number 4. And then, of course, the peacemaker, Enneagram 9. Very, very interesting. Where can we get these books?
So actually right now, if you went and looked up like a 60-day Enneagram devotional on Amazon, you can find them there. Perfect. Or you can find them on my publisher's website, which is whitakerhouse.com. Okay. And you can actually already pre-order them, and they will be in your hands or in your mailbox around September 8th.
And that's when they're coming out. Awesome.
Yeah.
First, you're going to want to find out what you are so you know which devotionals to get. Go to her Instagram page, enneagram.life. Elizabeth Bennett, thank you so much for all you are bringing to our community.
Oh, thank you.